Thank you for joining us today. My name is Jennifer Sharpie. I am the Executive Director of the Colorado Foundation for Agriculture. We do the Agriculture in the Classroom program. So our purpose is to work with students like you all across Colorado and help them understand where their food, fiber, fuel, and natural resources come from, and that connection that we all have to those things. Agriculture is everywhere in our lives. From the food we eat, to the clothes we wear, to the materials that are your desks, the paper that you write on, it all comes from agriculture. This book was a joint project through the Bessie Minor Swift Foundation on behalf of the Fence Post Ag News. And both Rachel and our illustrator, Liz, both work for the Fence Post. And then we have the Colorado Farm Bureau Women's Leadership Committee, the Colorado Cattlewomen, Bank of Colorado, and then various other individual donors. Let me spotlight Mark and Jill here. And why don't you guys tell us a little about yourselves and your connection to agriculture?
Okay. Well, hello from our family's farm here in Keenesburg, Colorado. My name is Marc Arnusch, and this is my wife, Jill. And our family farms not too far away from Denver, Colorado. We farm 35 miles northeast of Denver, where we grow corn, wheat, barley, alfalfa, and then we also grow a lot of certified seed that we sell to other farmers to plant on their farms. And then we also grow a lot of basically food for the dairy industry. So we grow a lot of feed for dairy cows. Our family farm is that, it's family. We have 3 generations of family involved in our farming operation, and we're very proud of what we do, and we would love to visit with you after today's session a little bit more about our farm. But we're excited to be here today, and we could not be more proud of Rachel Gable, who's put this book together. She's done a fantastic job, and she's telling a great story.
Awesome, great. Well, we're so glad that you guys were able to join us, and thank you so much for volunteering your time and helping us out here. Let's go ahead and we'll introduce the book. So the book that we're using is a new book that Rachel wrote, and it was a joint publication between the foundation and Rachel. It's called Still Good: The Faces of Family Agriculture. And what it does is it explores 2 different eras of agriculture. So in the book, we're going to see photos from the 1950s. And I don't know if any of our students have seen photo albums from their grandparents or their parents from those early years. And you might notice something about those photos, that they're not quite the quality that we would think of photos nowadays. They're generally black and white. The picture, the image isn't quite as clear because that's just the way the technology was back then. And throughout, as the little boy is looking at these photos, his grandpa tells him stories of agriculture when his grandpa was growing up and how agriculture was done in the 1950s. And then the little boy has this great idea to learn about agriculture today, and was able to get new photos, and you'll see those in the book as well. And they talk about how agriculture is different from now to what it was 70 years ago, but it's still good. So we'll go ahead and Marc and Jill will read the book and talk about the illustrations a little bit. And as you're listening, think of some questions that you might have, both about topics that we talk about in the book or that are covered in the book, or other questions that you might have about agriculture. And then you'll have an opportunity to ask those afterwards. All right, so we'll get started.
All right. The leather photo album creaked as the boy opened it, sending dust swirling into the light from the attic window. Out in the yard, he could see cattle milling around the pens and the rows of corn dancing in the wind. He flipped to a yellowing page with a black and white photo. Below it, someone had neatly written, "The Boys and Patsy, 1950. He turned to another photo and another before deciding he needed to know more. He knew exactly who would know more. He opened the screen door to the farmhouse and it groaned. He stepped on the porch and the old dog and the old boards groaned. A quilt flapped in the breeze on the clothesline. The boy sat down on the porch swing beside his grandfather, who was oiling a shovel handle. He looked over and saw the book in the boy's lap. I haven't seen that book for a while, Grandpa said. Farming sure is different now than it was. They opened the book to the photo of the boys and the milk cow. The older boy was hunkered on a little stool, milking a cow. The younger boy had his thumbs hooked in the straps of his overalls, a dog near his feet. "Oh, Patsy," Grandpa said, pulling the book and the boy closer. "We always had a milk cow around. She was a shorthorn. I used to weigh every bucket of milk to fill 10-gallon cans. We would sell those cans, and my dad would give me a few cents from the milk check. That was back when even a few cents could buy something." The boy turned the page to a photo of a long-legged boy standing next to a man with a weathered hat in front of an old tractor. Grandpa looked at the photo and leaned back in his chair. "That old tractor could really run," he said. "It was hot on that metal seat in the summer, and there was no heat when it was cold. That tractor is still out in the barn. Maybe I'll teach you to drive it sometime. They could sure build things to last." The next photo was a young boy standing proudly next to a steer. Grandpa studied the photo and sat back in his chair, tipping his straw hat back on his head and taking a long drink of tea. At his feet, the dog sighed. "That boy, not much older than you, was me," he said. "I took that Hereford steer to the fair and I won a blue ribbon. That fall, I led the steer down the alley at the Denver Union Stockyards. The buyers would all sit on the wooden fence rails that lined the alleys. I stood up straight and led that steer, hoping those buyers would bid. I couldn't understand the auctioneer's chant. That's what it's called when they talk so quickly, but they sure seem to."
And look at how proud that man is standing there next to that cow that he has raised. He's taken good care of her. He's done a great job raising that animal, and look at how proud he is standing there, even in this photo that's 70 years old.
Grandpa turned another page to a photo of a young woman in a dress behind rows of pumpkins and baskets filled with apples, zucchini, potatoes, onions, watermelons, and peppers. "This is your grandma when she was young," he said. "Her dad farmed, and it took him and the boys all summer to irrigate the produce. It was like watering our garden. But they did it for entire fields. Each morning, your grandma would drive the old pickup to the farm stand where she would sell the produce they grew. That's where I met her. I ate a lot of vegetables that summer, looking for excuses to see her." He paused and smiled at the photo. "This was back when farmers irrigated with shovels and set tubes by hand," he said. "There were no pivot sprinklers. It was back when irrigating was a full-time job all by itself. You couldn't buy fruits and vegetables anytime you wanted. They were available when they were in season, and people stored them in root cellars or put them in glass canning jars, like Grandma does with her dilled green beans and jellies." The boy smiled at the mention of Grandma's jars of green beans. They were his favorite.
And this is a picture that would look very similar to what our farm is today. In the middle of this picture, you see what we call a cement ditch full of water. And this is how we used to deliver water to our plants on our farm. Today, we sprinkle many of our plants through a large machine that walks through the field. But this is very similar to the way we used to irrigate crops on our farm.
Turn the page. The photo was of a young man trailing sheep through a small town. A horse pulled a round-topped herder's wagon behind the ewes, and dogs and kids on horseback were on all sides. That family has been raising sheep near Meeker for nearly 100 years, he said. They took them high in the summer and brought them back down in the fall. Herders stayed with the sheep and protected them from bears, wolves, and mountain lions, and kept them together and safe. It takes a lot of work to raise lambs, but I'm glad people still do it. The boy thought about wool socks in the winter and Grandma's lamb chops at Easter. Me too, the boy said. We've bought a lamb from them every year for as long as I can remember, Grandpa said. We always knew where our meat came from, raised either on our farm or on a neighbor's. When this photo was taken, there weren't refrigerated trucks to haul meat across the country. The next photo was a handsome young man standing beside a small airplane. Who is that, Grandpa? Well, son, that's me, he said. You were a pilot? The boy was sitting up straight now, eager to hear more. Grandpa scratched the dog that was now inching closer to him in search of a cool breeze. Yep, he said, you know how the yellow airplanes spray the neighbors' fields? The boy nodded. Well, I used to do that, he said. I'd fly low, buzzing the fields for the farmers who had hired me. I learned to fly in the war, so when I came home, I figured out a way to get back in the air. It was dangerous, and it still is, but it was a thrill and an important job. When I flew near our farm, I would waggle my wings back and forth to say hello to your grandma.
In agriculture, we use airplanes to fly over our field. We see that a lot. Every summer morning, you can see a plane just like this yellow one flying over our farm. It's like spraying yourself for mosquitoes before you go out and play. We try to protect the crop by spraying over the top of it every summer. And so this is something we get to see, and it's a real treat to have a plane fly over our farm.
As summer turned to fall, the boy returned to school, though he thought he would learn more on the porch with Grandpa and helping water the garden and fixing the old tractor and checking the cows than he did at a desk. The boy had asked to borrow the leather book and had carried it home carefully, protecting it like it contained treasures and knowing it did indeed. As he stepped into his own house, he had an idea. After school, the boy did his chores, ate dinner, then sat at the kitchen table, neatly writing letters and folding them into envelopes, which he put in the mailbox at the end of the drive as he waited for the bus. Each day, he hustled off the school bus and checked the mailbox. He flipped through bills and catalogs for seed, bowls, and tractors. Finally, one day, there was an envelope with his name on it. 5 more envelopes slowly arrived, and he sat at the kitchen table with the leather book open and worked as his mother moved about the kitchen and as the ag news played on the television. It was Friday when he carried the leather album down the driveway to his grandpa's porch. A quilt was drying on the line, dancing as the wind blew it. The dog and the old man stood and watched the boy run toward them. He bounded up the stairs and held the leather book out to his grandpa. Take a look, he told Grandpa, his heart beating fast from running and anticipation. Grandpa opened the book and saw again the photo of 2 boys and a roan milk cow. On the facing page, the boy had carefully placed a color photo of Holstein cows in a spotless milking barn. The stainless steel gleamed, and 2 men walked alongside the cows, ensuring that the robotic milker cups attached correctly. Well, I'll be, Grandpa said, studying the photo. Where did you find this? I wrote a letter to the family who owns Chapin Family Dairies, asking for a photo of them milking cows, he said. Mr. Chapin told me the robots milk the cows and test the milk, and they are able to safely milk more cows and make sure the milk is clean and the cows feel good. It only takes a few people to milk a lot of cows. Robots, I'll be darned, Grandpa said. They even have a robot to push the feed close to the cows so it's always there and fresh. The big tanker trucks pick up milk every day, the boy said. Dairy farming is different now than it was when you milked Patsy, but it's still good.
Do you remember in the beginning of the book when this farmer was milking a cow by hand. You saw the picture of Patsy, and he was sitting there on a chair milking into a bucket. Today, the Chapin family farm milks with robots. It's much, much different, much, much safer for the cow and much more safe for you.
Grandpa turned the page to the photo of the long-legged boy standing by the tractor. On the facing page were two men, father and son, in front of a combine and tractor hooked to a disc. Behind them, Grandpa could see a center pivot sprinkler against the blue sky. "This is Marc Arnusch and his dad," the boy said. "They came from Germany to grow sugar beets in 1951. But now they grow wheat, and they have the third generation working with them too." Grandpa held the book close, studying the modern combine and tractor, and he smiled when he looked back at the black and white photo, remembering the little red tractor. "Much different than what we had," he said. "Different, but still good."
And this is a picture from our family farm using some of the modern machinery like combines and tractors that drive themselves. No longer do we have to sit and drive them like your folks would drive a car or a truck. Today, satellites help us operate much of the equipment on our farm.
The next page was the photo of Grandpa as a boy and his Hereford steer. Next to it, the boy had taped a photo of an auctioneer in a crisp shirt and an evenly creased hat, leaning close to a microphone with his hand pointing to the crowd calling bids. In the ring was a fancy set of Hereford heifers. Next to the auctioneer sat two people with cell phones and computer screens in front of them. "Miss Robin at Livestock Exchange sent me this photo when I wrote to her," the boy said. He pointed to the computer. "That's how people at home can buy cattle on their computer or phone," he said. Grandpa grinned and said he'd never heard of such a thing. "They still chant and take bids, and Miss Robin said they still serve cherry pie, and it's really good," the boy said. Grandpa smiled when he turned the page to the photo of Grandma as a girl. Next to it was a photo of a young woman in shorts and a t-shirt leaning on a crate of cantaloupes. "Mrs. Gail Knapp sent me this photo," the boy said. "They've been selling produce at their farm stand for over 30 years. Their melons are trucked to grocery stores in several states. Because they produce more than they can sell at their stand, and not everyone who wants to buy their produce can come to their farm. They have Rocky Ford cantaloupes and watermelon, peppers that tumble in the roaster oven over a flame, sweet corn, okra, onions, potatoes, peaches, and jars of apple butter. Mrs. Knapp said the apple butter they sell is made exactly to my grandma's famous recipe, and it's the best around." They both knew that that was one of the things that hadn't changed and was still good. On the last page was the photo of the sheep trotting toward town. On the facing page was a new color photo of a young boy following the sheep through the same small town. "That is Ari Theos," the boy said. "He is the 5th generation of sheep producers on their ranch. They still trail ewes like they did when his grandpa was his age. Some things change only a little and are still good." Grandpa smiled and sat back in his chair. With the leather book closed on his lap, together the two looked over the farm and thought of the farms just beyond their view, with pivot irrigation, big tractors, and the setting sun, knowing it was different, but still good. The end.
Great. What did we think of the book? Do we give it a thumbs up? And are there any questions?
We do have some questions in Mrs. Weber's class.
Great, go ahead.
Lainey, use a really big talking voice. How old is this book?
answer it if Rachel's not going to.
Well, I can answer that, I guess. I thought maybe Rachel would, but my friend Rachel Gable just recently wrote this book, and it's about a year old. And she tells a great story of a lot of the hardworking farmers and ranchers that make up Colorado agriculture. And she does a good job of telling the story about how it's important to remember how we used to do things, but how we're doing things today.
Thank you. See, we have another question in Weber's class. Braylon, use a big voice.
How do you milk the cows with the robots?
How do you milk the cows with the robots?
Great question. So there's a kind of a hallway where these cows will walk in. And when the cows enter a certain area, a door will close. And a robot can see the cow and it can identify where we can milk. And so the robot will see where the udder is, where the milk comes from the cow, and it gently places these cups that suck the milk out of the udder very gently. And it's very quiet in that milk barn. The cows are very comfortable. And a cow will kind of act a little scared if there's too many people around. But with the robot being as quiet as it is, the cow's very calm. And as the robot is milking the cow, they become very docile or very satisfied. And that's one reason why a lot of dairymen are starting to move towards robotic milkers is for the health of the cow, the safety of the cow, and the quality of the milk that it provides.
Thank you. Abby, what's your question?
Where did the book come from?
She was asking where the book came from.
I can kind of answer that one. This is Rachel. Can you guys see me? I'm sitting out here waiting on heifer to calve. So that's why I didn't answer the last question, because they were being loud. But this book came from lots of good stories from real farms and ranches all over Colorado. And all of the pictures are from their old historical photos. And so we made up the stories to go along with them. And like the story about Theos, that's really him in that picture. And his family really does run sheep at Meeker, and they've been there for about 106 years. It's pretty amazing. So we had to make up parts of the conversation because of course I wasn't there 70 years ago to hear it, but all of the places and all of the farmers and ranchers in the story are real.
I do believe we have a question in Mrs. Mummer's class. You gotta speak up. Girl voice.
How do the tractors drive themselves?
So we have a question about how those big machines, those tractors drive themselves these days.
Gosh, I really love that question. This is my specialty. So the tractors basically talk to satellites that are orbiting above the planet. And they send signals back and forth, and they know where the edges of our fields are at. They know what basically a line that they might drive on is at. We still have a person like myself sitting inside the tractor just to make sure that if something was to happen that I can correct it and control it. But a computer within the tractor basically listens to what the satellite is telling him, how fast to drive, where to drive, how much fuel to burn. And so the science and the technology that we have in our tractors today, you will discover probably in the not too distant future when your family starts to have a car that drives itself. I would tell you, you will see the technology that we use on our farm probably in the next 10 to 15 years when you ride in a car or ride in a school bus. And it's that same technology that we're growing food with today.
It's kind of like a cell phone, how it talks to a satellite that you don't see. It's talking to a satellite. The the computer in the tractor does.
And this kind of technology allows us to put on just the right amount of fertilizer, the exact amount of pesticides or herbicides, and sometimes just the right amount of water that crop needs. And we're using that kind of technology to take care of the land, to take care of our crop, and to take care of our water. Plus, it's really, really cool.
Great question.
Mhm.
Any others?
We have one more. You got to speak up so he can hear you, okay?
I forgot.
Oh, he forgot. Oh dear. Hold on just a second.
Well, he's thinking we have another question in Mrs. Weber's class.
Okay.
And Alexa wants to know how the water pumps out of the plane when it's flying.
Okay. So yeah, inside of the airplane, there is a tank, like a great big barrel. And inside of that tank, there is a solution in there, and there's a small little pump that will pump a mist or a fine spray out through what you can kind of see on the back side of the airplane is kind of a pipe. And in that pipe, it scatters the water solution right over the top of the crop, just kind of like you would use an aerosol can of bug spray to spray your arms or your legs. It does something very similar to that. And we use this kind of technology to keep bugs away from the crop, to keep it healthy, safe, and sometimes we'll even spray a little bit of food on the plant as we fly over the top of the field.
Miniature squirt guns in that little deal. They just squirt it out.
Essentially.
Okay, I think we got the question again. So can you ask the question, please?
How does the water pump stop?
How does the water pump stop when you're watering crops?
Yeah.
When you're watering crops.
Okay, I assume that's like the picture we had seen where there was a cement ditch in the center.
With the sprinkler, I think.
Yes, I think she's asking about your new modern sprinkler. Because she
Okay.
talked about that earlier.
Okay, so it's kind of similar to a lawn sprinkler in that we set the time on the sprinkler to irrigate a specific area or to apply a certain amount of water. And we can control that with a computer. We can control that with our cell phones. And today we're using a lot of what we call sensor technology, where we have sensors buried in the ground where the crop is at, listening to hear what basically the plant is telling us it needs. And then we can program that sprinkler to stop at a certain time once that plant is satisfied or the ground is soaked up with water. And it's different than how we used to farm years and years ago. You remember the picture of the cement ditch with the water that was in it, kind of looked like a little river? Years ago, we would use siphon tubes to basically suck the water out of that cement ditch like you see here, and it would just scatter out in the field, and we call that flood irrigation. And it really worked well 70 years ago, but it uses an incredible amount of water. And sometimes you can't control where the water really needs to be for the plant. And so today we use these large, what we call sprinkler or pivot irrigation systems that puts on the exact amount of water right where we want it and at the right time. And it saves a great deal of water. It helps us do things precisely, and it saves a lot of manpower. Because I can tell you as a kid, I moved a lot of those siphon tubes, and that's maybe not my most favorite job on the farm, but it certainly has saved us a lot of time. If we don't have any more questions, I can ask you a few questions if you would, and see how much you learned out of our story if you'd like. The first question I would have for your classes here today is agriculture the same today as it was in 1950?
Yes, thumbs down now.
1, 2, 3. Is it the same?
No.
No. Everybody say?
No.
In some ways, though.
Yep. In some ways, it's still the same. We still take care of our animals. We still grow crops, but we do it in a much better way today. It's still good the way we've done it before in the past, but today we're doing it better than ever before. And I would imagine that trend is going to continue. Good job. What did you learn about the way the grandpa milked cows versus the way the Chapin family farm is milking the cows today? What was different today than it was 70 years ago?
Question?
I do.
How was it different, Sophia?
Because now is different because now we don't get water up there. Now we get water up.
How did they milk cows differently way back than what they do now?
Because
What do they use now, Braylon?
they use robots.
You're right.
Yep, that's exactly right. Years ago, we would sit on a little stool and we would milk the cow by hand into a bucket. And today we use robots, which is better on the cow. It's better for the quality of milk, and it's certainly easier on the dairyman too. Okay, question number 3. How do you think tractors and farm equipment have changed over time?
How have they changed over time? Yeah. He's got to speak up.
You used to have to drive them, but now they can send satellites up to space, and you don't have to drive them.
Yeah. So did you hear what he said?
Yep, we sure did.
Yeah.
Yep, that's exactly right. Not only is it the tractors driving themselves essentially, but we're also doing it at a much higher level of efficiency. And you're exactly right. Satellites are helping us drive tractors today and helping us do a better job in the field. That's exactly right. This next question's a little bit tricky, and I don't know if you've caught it in the story or not, but this question has to do with the auction. Remember where they had brought the animals in to sell them at the auction? What is an auctioneer's chant? And how can people buy cattle today without leaving their home?
You know what the chant is?
Oh, I know.
What is it, Braylon?
It is. It's by doing your own yard sale at your house for animals that you don't want to keep anymore.
Could you hear that?
Most of it.
You said it's like having a yard sale at your own house for the animals that you don't want anymore.
Good try. We can also, they have computers where they sell them, and you can get on your computer just like we are right now with a Zoom call, and they can listen and they can bid on animals that way too, right at home.
Yep, and they can see the animal in its natural environment, and they can decide if they wanted to bring that animal onto their farm as breeding stock, or if it's something that they would like to bring into their farm to feed longer, to finish out. And so today we can do that from the comfort of our own homes instead of driving long distances to go and look at cattle in areas and sometimes even in other states. Very good.
I think we had one that's thought of another idea of how to buy animals if you wanted to stay home. And what was that?
You could buy them on your phone.
On your phone too.
You could.
Yep, that's exactly right. It's just like shopping on eBay or on Amazon. Yep, you can buy them right off of your phone. You bet. Good job. So here's a question that's really important to our family since we're irrigated farmers. What does it mean to irrigate a field?
I know this one because I have
Okay, Torrin, speak up.
it is to get all the rocks out so the water can go to the plants.
Get the rocks out so the water can get to the plants? Did you hear that?
Not quite. Say it again.
He said it gets the rocks out of the field so that the water can get to the plants.
And there's also other ways.
You know, that's mostly correct. I think I probably confused you by saying cement ditch, but you are correct. It's the way we get the water to the plants. In Colorado, it simply just doesn't rain enough. And we have to provide water from time to time to keep our crop healthy, to keep it growing. And so to irrigate a farm or to irrigate a field is to provide water for it so it can continue to grow. So you got that right. So do you remember when the Knapp family farm had their roadside stand? The question has to do a little bit with that. Where can you buy fruits and vegetables that have been grown in Colorado? Where would you buy fruits and vegetables and know that they were grown in Colorado?
Where could you go?
So we have some ideas over here too.
Okay.
Go ahead.
You can go to a farm,
You could go to the farm. Okay. Where else
Yep.
could you
to the farmer's market.
To the farmer's market. Okay.
Yep.
Is that what you do at the farmer's market?
The outside farm.
The outside farmer market.
Yep. And there's one more. Where would you buy fruits and vegetables?
Everybody say it. The store.
Yeah. And how do you know that it's grown in Colorado? Well, that's a question we get as farmers all the time. The best way to find out if your fruits or vegetables have been grown in Colorado is to look for the Colorado Proud logo. Or if you go into a grocery store, look for some of the farmers that they have posters of hanging above the produce section. Most of those growers are friends and colleagues of mine. And you will see pictures of John Harold, the sweet corn grower over in Olathe, Colorado. A good family friend of ours, Bob Sakata, an onion grower near Brighton. But then the Petrocco family, DeSantes and Hiracatas, look for those family farms because there's a good chance they're the individuals who've grown the fruits and vegetables you're buying in the store that day. So good job answering that one. And always look for the Colorado Proud label. I've got one more question here for you. In the book, we saw a photo from the 1950s of a family trailing sheep through a small town to move them to higher and lower elevations. Do you know what trailed sheep means? And do we still do that in Colorado?
It means walking down the road with the sheep.
Yep,
It
that's
does.
exactly right. And do we still walk sheep down the road in Colorado?
Big. Do we still do that?
We still do that. Also, you can put them in the trailer.
In a trailer also.
Right. That is exactly right.
Yep, you got it right, both of those things. So especially over on the western slope of Colorado, you will still see a lot of sheep being walked right down the road to a different pasture or another part of that family's ranch. That's exactly right. Good job. So do you have any other questions for us that we can answer, or did you have any comments about today's book?
How many of you liked the book? Looks like it's unanimous that we liked the book.
And what do we need to say as well?
Thank
Thank you. We really enjoyed
Can I
it.
tell them something?
Yes,
Or
tell them
sheep
something
go-
quick.
They go to the farm.
Oh, they go to the farm.
Okay. They go to the farm.
Well, tonight, as you sit down for dinner and you have a conversation with your family today about what you did in school, talk a little bit about food and farming in Colorado and what you learned out of Rachel's book today. It's our history, it's our heritage. In my case, it's my family. And we can always benefit from having conversations about food and agriculture in this state.
Thanks for listening.